Welcome to Collective Church Online. Today we're doing things a little bit different. At Millard North, we are gathering around tables and having Community Sunday with discussions over the message. And so you get online your very own message. So I want to encourage you guys, jump in, be involved. If you would like, share, comment, engage with this video, that'd be a huge blessing to us, and I think it'll make it a little bit more fun to watch as well. So in this series, I don't know about you guys, we're in the series called The People Problem, and it has been a huge blessing for so many people. I know for myself, what God's been working in my heart. We've talked about a couple different things so far. We've talked about how to expect the mess, that everybody comes with their own bruises, blind spots, and bad days, and that includes us. Then second, we talked about just do your job, and that there's many times that we try to invade the job of others or the job of God, and we try to take that on, and God says, no, just do what I've called you to. And then last week, Maureen gave a powerful message about church hurts and how people, as an imperfect people, actually create a perfect church. That the perfect church is supposed to be filled with imperfect people and what that means for us and how to respond to it. Today, we're going to be talking about build the best story. And I don't know if you have ever been caught into a conversation with a little kid that's trying to tell you a story and you don't understand what they're saying or where the story's going at all. But not only have I been there, I've also been the kid. I was that kid that had a bad speech impediment and my brain moved way faster than my mouth, and so my story sounded a lot like, yeah, one time I was talking, and then we had one time I was the big guy came in, and we were there, and it was like, I don't know where this is going, but I know this is going to take 30 minutes to tell about 30 seconds worth of a story. That's the reality. Not everyone, I've worked on it, and so hopefully I'm a little bit better, but not everyone is a great storyteller. But we all are master class level story builders. Story builders. We build stories of the world around us. So what is story building? Story building is this. It is the conscious or subconscious story we tell ourselves to answer the question, why? Why? Behind the actions and the people that we see around us. So this is often called a false narrative, but really what's going on is our brain needs to have a complete story and make sense of the world around us. And so we just build these stories and these narratives behind everything. Think about it. If you are at, for example, at the grocery store and you're looking and you're trying to pick one of the 15 different types of granola bars there are there, and someone else is doing something similar next to you, and as you're looking around, you make eye contact. And that's awkward, right? And as you look over at them, they make eye contact with you, and they do look away. And so what we do immediately, we start telling a story, and the story can be, that they probably have social anxiety. Or they thought I was the one looking at them. No, they were looking at me. I caught them looking at them. I wasn't looking at them. Or they were looking at me because they don't like my outfit or my hair. Why were they doing that? We start to build, or maybe it's they're scared of me. I intimidate them. Or maybe they're jealous of me. That's why they're looking over at me. Man, I'm just looking good today. Or even so far as, oh man, they hate me. It's because of they're scared of me. It's my skin color. It's they don't like me because of something that I just am, or they're racist or whatever. Or maybe it's just awkward to accidentally make eye contact with a random person next to you. But the reality is we do story building about everything around us all the time. Why is that person walking down the street? Why is that person wearing that? Why did that person say that or do that thing? When they said that, do I even believe it? If it's true, and what's the truth that I'm going to build around what they're actually saying to me? We do story building in everything. Every single one of us is a master story builder. In fact, even calling back to Morgan's message last week about church hurt, one of the top reasons why church hurt happens is because a bad story is built and it's never addressed. When in reality, we either just need to drop it or address it, and we gotta stop just simmering on it. It's so weird because we become these elite level story builders, determining a person's motive in their history based off of a slight shoulder rub that we experience at the DMV, not realizing that this world-class architect of a building that we've built about them is actually just made out of spaghetti and marshmallows. It's like building those spaghetti marshmallow towers, and it doesn't actually hold any merit or any weight at all. But there are a few key problems with the stories we build. And the first is that they are almost always wrong. 99% of the time, our stories are off at least just a little bit. So we've got to assume that the story that I'm building in my head is actually wrong. It's not true. Second, they're almost always negative. Why? Because we got this pride in us that we want to justify our actions and prove to ourselves that we're a better person than the people around us, right? And so we naturally will tend to build negative stories about other people and positive stories about ourselves. In Scripture, we see this happen with a group called the Pharisees, and they hated Jesus, and Jesus actually calls them out for the stories that they've built and they've told. In Matthew 11:18-19, it says, "For John came," that's John the Baptist, "he came neither eating nor drinking, and you say he has a demon." Okay, so that's one story. "But now the Son of Man," Jesus talking about himself, "came eating and drinking, and you say, here's a glutton and here's a drunkard. He's a friend of tax collectors and sinners." And so they build this story, and here's just some of the stories that they've built around Jesus. In their story, Jesus is a drunk. He's a glutton. He's unclean. He is immoral. He's a liar. He's a rule breaker. He's a pot stirrer. He's a sinner lover, which actually Jesus is like, yes, I am, right? He is a blasphemer, and he's even demon possessed. And all of those accusations are only in Matthew chapter 9. That all just comes from that one chapter. You see the stories that they're building, and we try to build these things, and they're usually negative. And the problem is that it blinds them from seeing who Jesus actually is. And that is the third problem with story building, is that it always blinds us from the truth. One of my favorite examples of this is found in 1 Samuel 16. And what's happening here, God tells the prophet Samuel, and he says, listen, the current king, Saul, I'm done with him. He's causing messes. I'm taking my spirit away, and I'm going to get a new king, and I want you to go anoint that new king. And so he goes to this town, says, go to this town, Bethlehem. There's this dude named Jesse there, and one of his sons is who I'm anointing as the next king. And so Samuel goes down, and he obeys. In 1 Samuel 16:7, you start to see Samuel going through all the sons are standing before him, and he looks at them, and he's like, oh dang, look at you. Oh man, this son, he looks like, what's his name? Eliab. And he goes, Eliab looks like a flippin' king. Let's go. And he goes, I see it. And then God speaks to him in that moment, and this is what he says. And the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or his height, for I've rejected him. The Lord doesn't see the things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now, King Saul, he was tall. He had this build, he had this king-like look to him. And Eliab probably had the same thing and going, okay, so this guy looks like a king. And what happens? God says, no, I'm not looking at the outside, I'm looking at the inside. And one by one, Samuel goes through all these sons, all these kids of Jesse, and he goes, no, no, no. And God says no to all of them. Samuel goes, what am I supposed to do? Do you have any other son? And Jesse's like, I mean, yeah, I got one more, but he's watching the sheep right now. He's not really that important. He's the little one. And that's David. David comes, he says, bring him to me. God says, this is the man, and he anoints him. And it's incredible what God sees in David and the reality of what man saw, what people saw in David. See, some of the qualities that made you special back then were being firstborn or being the oldest, being a male, being lighter skin as opposed to darker skin, what your occupation is, your wealth and the property that you own, and so when we look today, what is that? That's kind of like fame, right? How many Instagram followers do you have? How many people know you, or have you written a book? It's like position. What's your job title? It's wealth. How much money do you got? It's beauty, and it's even education. What's your degree? And yet, despite all these things that you look at David, and he was the youngest. He wasn't the oldest. He was dark-skinned. He was a shepherd. That's a bad occupation. But hey, in Scripture it says at least he's handsome. Really? Like the reality, and he's also, if you do the math from when he was actually got the throne, David's about 8 to 15 years old right now. And so picture this like preteen and going, yeah, that's the guy. That's going to be the next king of Israel. I don't see it, God. I got to be honest. I don't see it. He's not that tall. He's handsome. He has a crappy job. I think he's probably the last one of all these brothers. But what God saw in David is completely different. What God saw was he saw a leader. He saw a man after God's own heart. He saw a warrior. He saw a king. He saw a dude who was going to be ruthlessly after the Lord. And he even saw a guy who goes, I'm going to make the Messiah. I'm going to make Jesus come in his ancestry line. That's a big deal. And the reality is what God saw was actually even higher. These are just the things that we saw that David became. But God's perspective in his heart and the story that he tells about David was actually even better. It didn't have him falling and committing adultery with a neighbor next door. It didn't have him making all these mistakes with his sons and his daughter and just the mess and the mistakes that David makes. It didn't have that. He goes, no, I see actually something way better. But the story that we tell is usually pretty negative. And it's usually based off of what we see and to help build ourselves up. So what's the key ingredient in changing these negative stories that we build? It's actually belief. Belief, and showing belief in someone else and even ourselves. The reality is everyone has a worldview, how you see the world around you and how you even see yourself. And it's amazing that one conversation can completely blow up the paradigm of the worldview that you see when someone calls something out in you that you never, ever thought possible for yourself. We need to be belief builders. We need to be belief builders. We've got to be coming in, and when people leave conversation with us, they have more belief in themselves than they had when they came in. And they go, wow, that person they believe in me. They see more in me than I see in me. I've never heard someone speak so much into my life. That is amazing. And guess what happens? When you inject belief into a person, into a conversation, and into the stories we build about them, it calls them higher. It helps us to reframe our mind and our story. And it actually, at the very least, builds an echo in their heart of what could be. So how do we become a belief builder? Well, there's 3 keys to becoming a belief builder. And the first is catch the crappy story. The very first thing, this is like that terrible first draft of a paper that you write, and you go, okay, I got to look at that, and I see a lot of problems with that. When I start building a story about someone, I got to catch it. I got to recognize it. I got to go, oh, hold on. I'm building a crappy story. I got to catch the crappy story. I'm building a story of disbelief. I'm building a story of gossip. I'm building a story of, oh, well, I'm determining their motives. They probably were doing or saying or thinking or feeling or elsewhere, somewhere else, they're probably, catch it. Recognize it. And then second, build the best story. Inject belief into this story that you're building. Make excuses for this person. Why did they do that? Why are they, what are they acting like? I don't care. Make excuses for them. Well, they're probably running late because maybe they're having a hard time, or maybe they didn't realize that they can't find their keys, or maybe everything in life is chaotic and they're losing control of it all. I don't know what it is, but let's start making excuses, because we all are master class story builders. Flip it. Use the same thing that you are good at and go, I'm going to architect, I'm going to build this thing that's the best story I can imagine for this person and their actions. But we don't want to stop there. We don't want to just catch the crappy story and then build the best story. But actually, the last step is then give the God story. In the same way that maybe looking at King David, I'd go, wow, he has certain qualities that could be good and helpful. So maybe my best story that I can come up is not God's story. God's story is astronomically higher and more positive and has more potential than any story that you can build. God looks at every single person around you and goes, they're mine. They're made in my image. And guess what? I can do anything through them. I can do anything right now if they say, all right, I'm fully surrendered. God's story for the people around us and God's story for you is better than you know. So when I see someone, I want to ask the question, what does God see? What's the story he's building? What's the potential that he sees? Because it's always, always better than what I see. We see this, in fact, we see a couple different things. Jesus, in John 2, verses 22 through 25, it talks about how Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, and he had just finished some of his very first miracles, right? The water into wine. People are seeing this, people are getting healed, and people are freaking out. They're like, this guy's incredible. And it says, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people. He knew their hearts and needed no one to bear witness about them, for he himself knew what was in man. The reality is that God sees the truth. The story that we build is not true, but God sees it. And what God sees is actually uglier than what we see. He sees the full mess. He sees the full sin. Scripture says no one does good, not even one. Everything that we do, even when we do good things, it's like we're building ourselves up as God because we're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a good person, right? And everything we do is messed up, is sinful, is wrong. And the reality is that God sees it. He goes, that's actually uglier than you think it is. But he also sees more hope in it than we do. In the same time that he recognizes the sin to a level that we cannot, he also recognizes the grace. And if God's given grace, if God's transforming lives, if God sees something even greater than what we see, recognizing the full capacity and the weight and the ugliness of the mess of sin, I think we better be able to do the same thing. Now, I saw this story building happening in my heart just this last week. So at the house, we had just put the kids to bed, and Morgan and Taylor were hanging out on the main level. I was upstairs, and what do they hear? They hear boom, 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 a banging on the kitchen window. They yell, Drew, come down. So I come down, I run outside, I don't see anybody. 10 minutes later, same thing. I throw on my running shoes, I get outside, and I see these teenagers walking by. And they split up, and so they're walking on opposite sides of the road, and I walk over to them and listen, I didn't necessarily have grace in my heart. I walk over and I look at one of them and I say, "You stay away from my house." And he goes, "What? I don't know what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Don't you dare come hitting on our window or doing any of that crap again. I need you to stay away." And he's like, "Well, I don't even know what you're talking. I'm just walking around." I said, I just saw you and your friend." He's like, "Oh, I don't even know that guy." He's lying. I literally saw them walking together. And I'm like, "Stay away." And I walk across the street to the next guy, and I said, "Stay away from our house." It's hilarious. He starts acting like he's deaf. He goes, and literally, like, those are the things that he's doing. And I'm like, "Sign for me." And he does this. Anyway, so I revealed to him that I'm like, "I know enough sign language to know that you're not deaf." And so he starts talking, and I'm talking to him, and I'm like, "I need you to stay away, or else I'm going to call the cops." And as he's walking away, he turns around, and he comes walking up to me, and he goes, "You want to know what happened last week? Last week, I was in this fight, and the cops got called. I got arrested. I don't care. It doesn't matter, because guess what? They let me go, because they realized I wasn't the one causing the fight, and I wasn't doing this stuff." And in this moment, man, I don't know what, but God revealed, one, how I was looking at them, and then two, he started to reveal how he sees them. And I felt like God just was speaking and convicting me about this first story I built about just these mean teenagers just trying to scare the crap out of my wife and sister-in-law, and I'm not okay with that. And then I see a little bit of the hurt, that it's the trauma and the history and the pain that's speaking in some of this and is inspiring some of these actions. And he goes like, "I understand. We're all just teenagers. We just do stupid stuff." And I said, "You don't have to do that. Don't give into that. You don't have to be that." And I felt like this was just a moment where God took over, right? Because Drew doesn't have that much great stuff to give, but God certainly does. And in this conversation, I go, "Listen, you've got so much. The fact that you're willing to walk up and knock on our window," and it's funny, he told a story about how it happened last week as well. Now we got the cops called on him last week. And I'm like, "Dude, the fact that like you have this boldness, you are not afraid of risk. Do you know that 99% of people out there are so afraid of failure, of risk, of what might happen? You don't have that. Do you know what would happen if you gave your life to Jesus, and if you ran with that with fearlessness? Oh man, you'd be unstoppable." And he goes, "Man, that's weird. That's crazy." And I said, I believe in you. If you ever want to come to Collective," I told him about it. I said, "We're pastors, and turns out we actually share the same name." And so I was like, God's doing something here. There's something happening here. This was not an accident. I want to call you higher. And what God revealed to me about how he saw this young man and how I had seen him. And that God sees so much more, and God sees you the same way. God sees you with more grace and potential than you see you. So I want to ask us a couple questions for us to contemplate and think about. And the first is, what stories are you telling about the people around you? And then what's God's story about them? Would you share that? I want to challenge you to give a God story to someone else. Call them higher, even if you may not believe it. Do it. And the next question I have, what does God see in you? Because his view and his perspective of you He sees more mess than you see, and he sees more grace than you see. And last, I want to ask the question, what's the story that you've built about Jesus? Because just like the Pharisees built this story about him that built all these walls so that they could not see who he was, sometimes we build stories about him being mean, about him being judgmental, about he hates me, about maybe he's just a dude that existed 2,000 years ago and has no impact on my life. What's the story that you've built about him? And that blinds you from seeing the reality that he is so much more than just a man. He's God incarnate. He loves you. He sees you. He is with you. He came to save you. He created you. He has a purpose and a plan for you. He has things working together for good for you. And he sees more in you than you see in you. He's got enough grace. He's got enough love for you. And do not let the story that you're building about him blind you. And if you would go, man, I want to give this Jesus thing a try. Maybe for the first time or the first time in a long time, would you comment or would you just share with us real quick and just comment down below, I need Jesus, or I want to see Jesus differently. And you can do that, comment that down below, or you can email us at collectiveomaha.com or message us on Instagram or Facebook. We would love to start walking with you in this journey because we're never supposed to do that alone. Then we have some discussion questions. If you want to get a couple people, share this video with them and discuss some of these questions about how we do story building and how we can give a God story.